How do you know when it's a normal, distressing emotion versus something that you should be concerned about in either yourself or somebody else?
So there's a few ways. I mean, part of it is there's no real right feeling, right? You have the feelings you have. And I think that I would never want to say, we always expect to see this feeling under these circumstances, because of course our feelings are informed by who we are, our histories, what's come before. So there's not always a perfect map of what we expect to see. And here again, psychologists can just usually just take a much more curious, like borderline anthropological stance towards emotion as opposed to judging or valuing. But here's what we don't want to see. We don't want to see emotions getting in the way of people's lives. That's where we start to be concerned. So we fully expect to see sadness under sad conditions. We don't expect to see depression, which is where mood becomes so low that it really casts a pall over everything in a person's life. We fully expect to see anxiety if there's something wrong, right? If there's, danger around you or a lethal virus in the environment, right? We expect to see anxiety, but we don't expect anxiety to become paralyzing and get in the way of people's ability to do the things that really are safe or they can and should be able to do. So for us, the index is really much more about functioning. And do emotions undermine the ability to function well in the world? Because they should be supporting our ability to navigate our lives and deepen our relationships. They shouldn't be getting in the way.
So, the real kind of takeaway here for all of us is that distressing emotion, it is part of being mentally well. But when you start opting out of seeing friends and you stop the kind of hygiene protocol of taking showers and exercising and eating, or you start over medicating your feelings with alcohol or weed or whatever, that's the red flag.
That's right. So I'm going to even tease that apart a little bit more. So the
Awesome.
emotions can either get in the way, right? So mood that actually disturbs the ability to live one's life, or, and you moved in this direction, it's such a critically important direction, what I would call costly coping. So people are coping with moods, but they're doing it in ways that come at a cost. So either abusing substances or being incredibly hard on the people around them or turning it against themselves, whether, they're running themselves down or even engaging in self-harm. Those may be actually providing some relief. People only do things that actually work for them, but they come with a price tag. So that's the other thing we look for. So we look for a mood that gets in the way of the ability to live one's life, or coping that is a costly way to go about things, if not immediately, certainly over time. Those are the flags that we keep an eye out for.
I got it. Two flags, mood and costly coping. And I want to role play for a little bit, if that's cool, because I
Sure.
love to leave our audience in action and empowered. And everybody, you have got to go pick up this book. It is not only so enlightening, but it is hopeful. I mean, I wish I had this book 3 years ago. And I'm so happy that I have it now because I find that these tactics are incredible, not only for our teenagers, all three of them in our kids are 24 through 18, but also for adults and for people I work with. And so if you're in a situation where, let's just talk about the costly coping stuff that you talked about. I can't tell you how many parents and friends where we would confide in one another during the last 3 years. My kids are completely off the rails. Like they're not even showing up for the Zoom classes. My son is hitting the vape, smoking weed, playing video games for 6 hours a day. I don't even care anymore. Like the stress level is so high, as long as they're waking up in the morning and they're not mean to me. How do you, as a parent or a friend or a partner of somebody, you see somebody smoking too much weed, playing video games for too long, those sort of coping mechanisms, you're right, let you escape. How do you even begin to approach it? Because every time we would approach it in our household, you get the big shove back.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. So I think the first step is to really recognize that it is working for that person, that it is serving a purpose. And you described that, right? That Substances can help numb distress. They're incredibly effective at that. That's the problem with them, right? Is that they work to make pain
Oh
go
my
away.
gosh. Hold on a second. Can I just
Yeah.
stop there? I don't know that I've ever heard anybody ever hit the pause button and tell the truth
Mm,
that people engage in these behaviors because they work for them, which is why they become so damn defensive when you try to take them away from them.
exactly.
Wow.
This is where I'm so glad I got the training I did when I did, because the premise of my whole training is that humans are rational actors. They don't do things that don't serve a purpose. Even if those things outwardly end up causing so much trouble, there's always a rationale. And that's actually the best part about my job, is that when people come my way clinically, my job is to figure out, you're doing this thing that is just damaging your life and getting in the way. We have to understand why, so that you then can feel like you've got some choices.
Wow. Like I'm sorry, I'm just letting the profound nature of what you're asking us to do. Because I can think of several friends who had daughters in particular, self-harm, cutting, very self-destructive behavior. And from the outside, you look at it and you panic, and then you make it wrong, and you want to do anything because you love this person to stop it. But why? Like, I think it means that we're missing this critical step in connecting, which helps us lead to the problem solving. So why is it so important, even though it's terrifying when your kid is hurting themselves or they're clearly escaping and addicted? Why is it so important to say to yourself, this is a coping mechanism that's working for my kid, and I actually have to start there?
Here's why it's so important. Because the alternative is a dead end. And what I mean by that is that if you come at a kid or anyone saying, you need to stop, and then fill in the blank, what you're going to run into is a part of them that is like, you don't get why this is working for me. And now you have a conflict. If you go the route of saying, you're a smart kid, you wouldn't be doing this if it wasn't working for you at some level, the conflict ends up in the kid or the adult that you're trying to help, between the part of them that doesn't want to be cutting or abusing substances or, playing video games 8 hours a day.
Or running around and sleeping with the wrong people, or which is what I was doing in high school, but okay.
Yeah, right? I mean, whatever it takes to help yourself feel better. So there's a part of them that doesn't want to be doing those things, and there's a part of them that is doing those things. And the job of the helpful outsider is to try to get a conflict going between those two parts of the person who is doing the thing, and to stick up for the side that wants to be healthier. And that, I'll tell you the language that I remember when I learned this as a clinician around if a client comes in and is talking about suicide, right, which is of course terrifying.
Isn't it also normal to have suicidal ideation?
Let's come back to that. That's a really critical question. It's a really critical question. But sometimes clients will come in and talk about suicide. And I remember the day I learned the language from a senior clinician to say to someone, listen, clearly part of you is really thinking about hurting yourself, but part of you wants help. And that's the part that's telling me that you're having those thoughts. I'm going to stick up for the part of you that wants help. And that's how you don't turn it into a fight.
That's incredible. And I you can probably hear me, everybody. I've got a pen in my hand. So this is one of those conversations where I'm having a conversation and furiously scribbling notes, which I don't know why I have to do that, given that I can listen to this again. But there's a part of you that is really considering this, or there's a part of you that is in so much pain that you're resorting to cutting to feel alive, or you're in so much pain that you're smoking dope so that you can just numb out and forget about it. But there's a part of you that wants help. And that's the part of you that I'm speaking to.
Yeah.
Did I get that right?
You just say you wouldn't be letting me know if you didn't want help. There's a part of you that wants help.
What do you do if they didn't tell you or you don't? Like, you know what I mean? Because a lot of times, particularly with these behaviors, people hide them.
It's true. So eventually you find out, or you smell the weed coming out of their room, or you notice that a young person has harmed themselves. So I think the first thing we want to do as sort of the helpful people who are trying to step in is to get to a place with ourselves where we feel a bit centered. Reacting strongly in those moments does not go well. But then I think it does sometimes happen that you have to confront a person about their behavior. And again, I think teaming up with them and teaming up with what I know all teenagers have and all adults have, which is that growth-giving, health-seeking side, is the way to go. So I think, let's just use marijuana as an example, and you can smell it.
I'll be the kid. So I'm sitting in my room. I've lit up a big doobie. I'm smoking. I don't even know you're outside, Mom, because I got my headphones on and I'm playing Minecraft and I'm scrolling on Instagram. I don't think you're home. Didn't hear the garage doors open. There I am in my room.
Okay. And here I come. So knock, knock, knock on the door, no answer. So I let myself in, right? And I say, oh, buddy, you and I both know that smoking weed like this is going to get in the way of the kind of life you want to lead. We got to figure out what's getting in the way of you making different choices.
Whoa. Like you just spoke to a different part of me.
That's the goal, right? That's
now,
the
do you
goal.
leave the room? Do you just drop it like a grenade and then let that kind of settle for them? Or do you sit down on the bed? Because I think we just don't know what to do. And then we get so emotional, Lisa, that we react, which makes it worse.
Well, I think I'd see what the kid does, right? I mean, I'd sort of take the cue from them. I mean, because he just did say something. I think we also have to give kids room to come to where we are, right? I mean, I think it's so hard in parenting so often, and I have two teenagers myself, right? So often in parenting, we have a full head of steam. They walk in the door and we're like, we need to talk about boom, right? And the kid's like, whoa, like I was going to go get a snack, right? I was not ready for this conversation. So I think...
Plus now I'm high, Mom, and my tongue feels like it's filled my mouth. I can't have a conversation.
I can't have a conversation. So then I think you may, let's just say for the sake of argument, like this isn't a great time to have the conversation because the kid is not entirely available to it. And then I think you say, we're going to have a conversation about what's happening here. And my favorite phrase, and I also remember the moment I learned this in my training, is because what we're doing isn't working. What you're doing isn't working, right? And that's the thing about substances. They do get to a place where they start to undermine a person's life, that they're not showing up at school, or they're underfunctioning academically, or they aren't actually maintaining friendships, or they're not contributing to the home or the community. And so that becomes the thing. Like, you can't keep doing this because what you're doing isn't working. We have to come up with something else. So if you're in so much pain that you're doing this, we're going to find another way for you to address that pain. But the goal, and you can hear this in every approach, is to not turn it into a showdown between the person who's trying to help and the person they want to help.
That's amazing. It's like I just had this visual of kind of that, you're right, it is a showdown, the knock on the door, the screaming, the shame, the this, and now you're like putting your 40 or 50-year-old angst about this onto your 16-year-old, and it just compounds everything that they're trying to escape anyway. And I had this visual of if you don't have that, as you said, head full of steam, but you can center yourself and realize you're trying to get on the same page with the part of them that wants to do better. And I had this visual, instead of pounding on the door, of literally like putting your arm around them. Mm-hmm. Like, buddy, I love that you're like, hey, buddy, and I love this. I wish I had talked to you 2 years ago, because that what you're doing isn't working. When my husband's depression came to a head, I was the bitch on the door knocking. And what I was trying to say is that I was trying to say what you're doing isn't working. And instead, of course, I'm like, thank God you're doing yoga and all this stuff because you'd probably be dead if you weren't. But you got to start that. You're like, you got to get in therapy and you got to take But what I wish I would have known and what I hope everybody's taking away is that phrase: what you're doing isn't working.
Mm-hmm. We got to do.
We got to do something else.
And I'll tell you, Mel. So when I was in training, I had a really brilliant and terrifying supervisor, and she said to me, "You get 8 words an utterance." When you're listening and sitting with a client, they can say as much as they want to say. You can't go past 8 words. And the reason for this is as soon as you're past 8 words, you're into somebody's head. You've bypassed their heart, right? But if you can keep it tight, and if you can go to the core of it in 8 words or fewer, it lands. And so what's interesting is that discipline of needing to find just the arrow and the through line. That's how I've ended up actually being able to translate over into writing and podcasting and all of the other forms of work I do, because if you're doing good clinical work, you're just going for the central message as cleanly and as easily understood as possible.
I love how you simplified this for us. That you have really drawn this highlighter and highlighted the notion that distress is a really important part of being mentally well. And it's only when it becomes destructive to your mood and your daily functioning, or you start having costly coping mechanisms, that we gotta sound the alarm, so to speak, because what they're doing is working for them to escape or cope, but it's not helping. And so your role, and you've just made this, you are like an arrow hitting the target, Lisa. Like, this is your genius. That your job is to appeal to the greater part of them. What you're doing isn't working. And I'm here to help you figure out what could work.
Exactly.
Wow. What you also write in your latest bestseller, The Emotional Lives of Teenagers, that there is a difference with how the different genders cope with stress. Can you walk us through that?
Sure. Let me say a whole bunch of caveats first.
Sure.
Anytime we're looking at gender findings, we're looking at huge numbers. There's tremendous overlap between the genders. And then, of course, we've only really studied conventional genders. We've only really studied male, female. We are slow to the table to study kids who do not fit into one of the traditional categories. So everything I'm saying needs to sort of be couched in that broader understanding of how we do the research and what we've studied. So having said that, when we look at traditional gender categories, a pretty consistent broad finding is that when they are in distress, girls are more likely to discuss and boys are more likely to distract. And these are both actually acceptable forms of managing emotions. There's actually nothing wrong with either. But where we see trouble is if you veer to the extreme or you use that strategy all the time.
Can you give us an example of what you mean by discuss or distract, so we kind of have a knowing, and then also what's sort of within range of helpful coping?
Absolutely.
And what gets to be on the fringe?
Absolutely. So discuss, so let's say a girl, someone's mean to her at school, and she goes and finds her best friend, and she's like, you're not going to believe what so-and-so just did. She was so, such a jerk to me. And her friend says, oh man, she is such a jerk, and I love you, and you're fine, and you're cool. Okay, yay, like good outcome. We like that. We could also have a boy where someone's a jerk to him at school, and he's upset by it, and he doesn't want to talk about it. But he goes home and he plays basketball for a little while, blows off steam, gets it out of his system, gets past it, lets it go, moves on. Those are 2 perfectly reasonable outcomes of those 2 different strategies. What we don't want to see is, and I'll just stay with the boy-girl
Great
stereotypes, we don't want to see is girls who then they discuss it with their friend, and then they end up in a 3-hour conversation discussing it with their friend, and then they are doing the, like critical analysis of the text thread with the girl who was mean, and then 4 other girls hop in on this. And there's 2 problems with this. One is, and this is sort of a secondary finding, girls are more likely than boys to engage in vicarious distress, meaning if my friend's upset, now I'm upset too.
Yes.
So it has this like widening, swath of distress. The other thing is that it threatens to turn into what psychologists call rumination, which is basically a spinning of one's emotional wheels. And though it's kind of gross, it's a really helpful metaphor. It's like picking at an emotional wound, right? The more you talk about it, the worse it gets. It's not healing up. Better to just leave it alone. So we don't want to see that extreme. And if we go down the boy stereotype, what we don't want to see is that, every time this kid has something that feels bad, he just shuts down, goes plays basketball or hops on his video game and just stays in this distracted place until the feeling dies down enough that he can tolerate it. Because the cost to him is, number one, he's not getting the kind of social support he deserves, right? Nobody knows he's in pain. Number two, he's not actually developing the fluency in verbalizing emotions that we'd like to see. The part of what happens if we go down these boy-girl paths is that girls get better and better and better at talking about feelings because they practice it all the time. And boys can get worse and worse and worse at talking about feelings because they're not practicing it with one another, especially. And so the ideal management is somewhere in between, a little discussing, a little distracting, or any variety of other strategies that help to tame or express emotions. We just don't want to see anybody leaning too hard on one strategy.
Today, you're going to meet Dr. Lisa Damour. And if you thought the last 3 years in lockdown impacted you, wait till you hear her describe the impact that it had on young adults. Whether you're worried about kids in your life, or you're worried about somebody else, or you're worried about yourself, this is a remarkable opportunity for you to learn, for you to get scripts, for you to know exactly what to say and do to become a better you.